Hey everybody, welcome back to the Pop Culture SquadCast. I'm Bob Harrison. We have Madman Mike Gold. Hi Mike, how are you?
I'm swell. How you doing, Bob?
I am super stressed and excited. We have Baltimore Comic-Con coming up this week finally, and but it is I am stressed. I lost the day. I had tomorrow to continue to prepare because we're gonna head down there on down when I say it's like 5 miles away on Thursday to get ready. But I have to go make a 12-hour trip tomorrow and go pick up our car that was vandalized. So
Your car was vandalized.
it was we left it in Rochester a few weeks ago because it was broken into. It is now fixed, but that means I have to go get it, and I have to go get it
Right.
tomorrow. So I've lost the day.
That's-
So I'm like stressed out. We got
That sucks.
a lot of prep.
Well, deep breathing,
Mhm.
the routines,
Yep.
smoke a little weed, whatever it takes.
Have gummies. They work.
Gummies work.
We are very excited. So you are going to be very busy at Baltimore Comic-Con. I'm going to be very busy at Baltimore Comic-Con. People going to Baltimore Comic-Con will go to booth 114 because the map has been released. That's where you will be, and we will have some some Pop Culture Squad things to draw people's attention there. We'll have the banner there and some stickers people want to pick up and stuff like that.
Yep. And we'll even tell people watch the SquadCasts.
Yeah, there will be.
You'll say that a lot.
Sure. There will be these guys up here, these postcards and stuff like that. You can pick up.
Mm-hmm.
There are QR codes on them, so you can just save and subscribe and go from there. But we're looking forward to it. I want to run through the. Let's see if I can do this. I wanted to run through. I put this in the wrong thing, but let's run through some of the panels that people can see that find us at. So I wanted to kind of do that if we don't have too much of a time. But this is actually the last panel. It's out of order, but we'll go backwards. So Sunday, because we just went through it and then I didn't have time to bring it back because we love getting in front of you guys so much. But on Sunday at 1:00, I'm going to be hosting a panel called "Creating Socially Representative Comics in 2023." So this is a great group of people, and we're going to be talking about what goes into making all readers feel included in comics. And I think people are doing a great job of it today. I think it's constantly getting better, and these are some people who are going to be talking about it. So,
well, when it comes to any form of networking, Amy's your person.
Absolutely.
She is probably the second best networker I've ever seen.
Well, who's first?
In my life. Karen Green.
Okay.
And we should get Karen onto this show.
We absolutely should.
She's one of the most marvelous human beings on the planet, although now she's trying to buy a co-op, so she's got a lot of paperwork ahead of her. But other than that, she's just, she's with Columbia University in New York, right. and among her many tasks, she keeps the comics collection there. Mm-hmm. And she took me to the stacks, where they keep all of the comics, all the graphic novels and stuff. And she sure stopped me in a certain place, so asked me a couple of questions, and we were conversing. And I realized that, not coincidentally, I'm sure, she stopped me right in front of my section of the Columbia University
There's
library.
A Michael
stacks. Well, it's called the alphabetical order, but yes. And yes, I was really amazed. There's something about, hey, this is like, Columbia University. Come on,
So it's funny you bring up Karen because it's actually 9 years ago today. This is the first time I ever encountered Karen Green.
Mm-hmm.
It was our first Baltimore Comic-Con, and we went to a panel, and she was in the audience of the panel, and both her and I engaged the the people on the stage, and I don't think I made a good impression on her, so I'd like the opportunity to correct that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I understand.
So we'll definitely have to get Karen on the stage on the show.
Good person. I mean, one of the best. And,
absolutely.
And I envy her job.
Oh, absolutely.
I truly envy her job.
Sure.
So,
well,
okay, nobody tell Karen that we've been talking about her.
Okay, we won't, but hopefully maybe we'll see her this weekend. That would be awesome.
I don't think she's coming this year.
Okay.
I don't know.
We're gonna talk to some ponies at Baltimore. We're gonna have a bunch of pony creators because My Little Pony is a thing that people love. There's comic books off of them, and these are all. The interesting thing is that all of these people are friends of mine who we spend a lot of time talking about comic books, not necessarily about ponies, mostly not about ponies, but we're gonna talk ponies at the con, and hopefully a bunch of people will get to see their favorite My Little Pony creators and talk about it.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't My Little Pony the animal that like farts out rainbows?
I don't know. I know there's rainbows involved. I know there's rainbows and sparkles and all kinds of pretty things. So it'll be fun. And I'll tell you
a vaguely related story.
All right.
Several years ago, this is pre-COVID, so I have no idea exactly when it happened. I went up to I went up to someplace in upstate New York where my buddy Joe Staten was doing an appearance, a store appearance.
Mm-hmm.
And, it seemed like a nice day, blah, blah, blah. So we went out there and there were 33 trillion little kids. So Joe was drawing Scooby-Doo because that's his most little kid friendly thing. And watching those kids watch Joe draw Scooby-Doo was a wonderful experience. Those kids talk about the sense of wonder, the awe in their eyes. It's like, here's a blank piece of paper, and what happens next is magic, which is true.
I had that experience with my son once. We were at Awesome Con, and we walked up to the Oh Yeah booth, and Franco was there, and he was drawing something on a card. And my son, Luke, my youngest, was, I guess he was about 10, somewhere around there, and he just was fascinated with the way that Franco was rendering something onto this note, postcard or something like that.
Yeah, he did one of me on those cards as Blackhawk.
Well, that's awesome.
Yeah, I love it. I have it.
I'm sure.
I mean, I have it here.
I'm sure.
It's
just Franco's over here on my wall too, so I have a question that Franco did.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Didn't have to draw a face. Well, you made it easy for him.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful.
He's very talented.
This is my first panel on Sunday, and it's about inspiration and inclusion in cosplay. And the main guest is going to be Harry Crosland, and whoever Harry can get to come to the panel. Harry was supposed to be on the show tonight. He was supposed to be here earlier, but he got confused with the dates. He also is going to be judging the cosplay contest, which is on Saturday. So we want to make sure everybody is aware that on Saturday there's a place when you go right in. They'll get you set up and registered for cosplay. But Saturday is the cosplay contest. It is held, I think, in the ballroom, so it's not necessarily in the middle of everybody, but there will be plenty of cosplay. And Harry's he's a really, really smart guy and really cares about people having a good time. So that's one of the best parts about Baltimore Comic-Con is him running that part of it. You've met him.
Cosplay there is some of the more interesting cosplay I've encountered on the convention circuit. I don't know why Baltimore is so good at it, but
it is very good at it. It is there's something about it that's very personal. I think one of the things, to be honest with you, is very inclusive. There is a large there's a large segment of people that go there for cosplay. You're not going to run into too many of those giant structural pieces that people are making their way around, but there's a lot of people dressed in ways that make them feel comfortable, make them feel good. You know, my son last year cosplayed for the first time as Red Hood, which he enjoyed. Unfortunately, he's not going to be there this year, but it's going to be a great time. That's one of the best parts about the show. This is turning into like Baltimore Comic-Con prep, but you know,
it should be.
We've been talking about it for months now, so it's time. This is going to be one of
is.
my highlight panels. This is on Saturday afternoon at 5:00. I will be hosting this panel. This is and we've called it Juggling Chainsaws. It is the role of the editor in comics. I have assembled a group of editors, and we are super excited about it. You, of course, will be there, so that's good. I get to ask you more questions. We're going to have Jack Harris, who was our guest last week. We're going to have Brittany Holzer, who is a current DC editor, and she's just really doing some excellent work there. I think I'm very, very happy to have her on that. Also, Howard Mackey is going to join us, who was Marvel editor before he became a freelance writer, and also someone else who was a Marvel editor before they became a freelance writer in Louise Simonson. I think I should bring that picture that you sent me last week, because folks, I got a picture last week of Mike and Louise from I think it's John Byrne's fancy party in 1986, and let me tell you, it looks like Louise is absolutely just wanting Mike to shut up and get done with what he has to say.
That's pretty much true for everybody who I meet. You know, they're just too polite. I pick on people who are too polite to say, "Shut the hell up, will you?"
Well, the interesting thing is in that picture was also Carl Potts, who is not going to be there this year, but we did see him in Terrificon. He's doing great.
Carl's a good guy.
Yeah, so
those are good people, and you know, we all can just sort of talk about the routine of editing comics and how you head to it and how you change with each project and each person, and then Wheezy can just come up there and just tell everybody else how you really do it.
Right. Well,
so
she's gonna
when I introduced Adrian, my daughter, to Wheezy, I think it was in San Diego, but who knows? They all look alike now. And I sort of tricked her because I know Adrian can be kind of shy. So I sort of backed her up into Wheezy and then introduced him. And she almost fainted. She literally almost fainted. Louise Simonson is a god to this industry. I
think she's amazing, and I have probably embarrassed myself at least twice when I've talked to her, because usually it's late and I've been drinking a little bit and I just fanboy out and I can't help it. And she's so lovely, and she knows who I am, and we've talked many times, but I just feel like she's got to be thinking that's that guy who just drinks too much, He's always fanboying because she did so many amazing things. Her writing is ridiculously good. I thought she's one of the few people who really understood what Chris was doing and knew how to build on it.
I think that's true. Yes,
it wasn't easy for people to build on what Chris was doing, but she was able to, because she took what she did with X Factor was unexpectedly brilliant.
To get any sort of mileage out of something that is so well developed, and that's unique, but she's made a habit of it. I mean, she's invaded Superman space.
Sure.
And Lord knows lots of people have worked on Superman, and many of them have done very good work. And she just breezes in, and it's like as if nobody ever touched the character before. It was wonderful.
Right. Exactly. We're going to get to something like that too coming up soon. But this is a panel I'm not going to be at, but you are, and I'm excited about that. I will be at the yearbook auction at this time, but we're going to celebrate E-Man's 50th anniversary this year. You and your former protege will interrogate the lovely Joe State.
I'm not sure it's fair to call Robert my protege. He was my assistant when I came back to DC in late '85, and it wasn't too long before he made his editorial bones. After
Sure.
that, smart, hardworking guy. Chucked it all to become like, a teacher. He ran for school board, was on the school board out here in Connecticut. Now he's down in Maryland, where I understand the bureaucracy will kill you.
Sure.
And just a nice and polite guy. Joe Staten, on the other hand, is publicly one of the nicest guys on earth. Privately, he's strange. And I love him. We have been friends. Jeez, I mean, since before First Comics, 50 years at least. Well, about 50 years. I don't know. I can't count anymore. But Joe's a great guy. His wife Hillary is even greater. I hope she'll be around somewhere. She's done a lot of work with him. Good.
I'm sure she'll be in the room. And that is going to be a great panel. I know Joe's excited about it. And then you and I are going to put on some gear and head into this room on Saturday morning. It's early, so I'm going to have to get you up early. It's at 11 o'clock on Saturday. We're going to put the amazingly talented and incredibly interesting Steve Rude on Spotlight. We're going to get John Workman to come visit us to do this as well. And that should be fun.
Steve is a unique talent. Nobody draws and paints the way Steve does, which is a good thing because he's damn good at it. And another unique guy who is just, every time he does something, you just look at it and the breath comes out of your body, and it's like, how could he do this? This is so beautiful.
Right.
And in his spare time, he dresses up as Space Ghost.
I hope he doesn't do that this time, though. But it should be very interesting. I have not had the privilege of meeting him yet, but I will on Friday. We're going to get to that in a minute. But Friday evening at 5 o'clock, I'm doing this panel called "Getting into Character," and we're going to talk about it with our guest, who's going to be here shortly. And he's going to be on this panel as well. We're going to have a bunch of really great writers who are going to talk about the craft of taking an existing character that someone else has already created and breathing some life into it, but in making it your own in a way that is respectful to the character. This is a great group of people. And I'm excited for it. I think it's going to be a great conversation.
I would think so. This is a very, very good group of folks, particularly for this topic.
Right. Well, the interesting part is
it's not easy to step into that. I mean, we were kind of talking about that with Wheezy before,
Sure.
to boldly go where really gifted, talented people just went. Right. And say, I'm the new kid on the block. We're going to do everything different. We're all going to talk backwards now, and we're going to wear our underpants outside our trousers. And that's what happens. That's what happens.
Yeah, it should be good. Should be a lot of fun. And the first panel that is going to happen at Baltimore Comic-Con is Friday at 2 o'clock. It's got to be in the ballroom, because there's so many people going to be on this table, and it's extra long. The panels at Baltimore are 45 minutes, but this one's going to be an hour and a half, because that's pretty much what we're going to need. But we are going to talk about, this is going to be a first comics 40th reunion panel, essentially. All of the characters that are in the yearbook this year at Baltimore Comic-Con are first comics characters. And this group of people is going to be on the stage, and if it was 45 minutes, I just have we just have room for Grell and Chaykin to say hi, and then that would be the end of it. So,
Right. And I couldn't even show up.
right, exactly.
Yeah, you got a panel full of some of my closest and oldest friends.
What I love about it is that they're also friends of mine in a lot of ways, and I am incredibly blessed and thankful to be able to do that. And I'm looking forward to it.
And it only comes 10 years after our 30th anniversary.
It's amazing how that happens.
Yeah, this may be the last of those types of panels. I can't imagine my being able to. Well, I don't even make sense now. Can you imagine what it'll be like 10 years from now?
No, you'll be fine. We're done with those now. Listen, you're not allowed to get any older. It's this is as far as it goes. You're just gonna.
I'll have you know, I'm right in the middle of writing my column, my Pop Culture Squad column for next Monday. My previous column, of course, was posted yesterday, but because I'll be in Baltimore, I got to write ahead. And I can't write ahead about comics because the medium changes so fast. So I'm doing an as is column and writing about politics because that never changes.
Well, I want to kind of actually talk. I want to talk about my column that came out today, which is the new number ones for this week. And I've changed the format over the past month, where I'm doing it weekly instead of for the full month, because I think it works out better. But I'm gonna bring in this one thing, and I want to talk about this. I don't think we've talked about it. You and I have. And it's this book. The hardcover for Gotham City Year One came out today. Because that's how those things work. But you've read this, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what did you think of this book?
Well, I read it as it came out.
Sure.
I enjoyed it enormously, which is not surprising given the fact that I generally enjoy just about everything that the people who worked on this book have ever done. So this is a no-brainer for me. Getting Tom to do something, with Batman, but very different from the Batman stories that he's done or that we know, finding any space to do something different with Gotham City, with Batman, with the Wayne family, that's tough. And these folks pulled it off nicely. I hope that the collected edition reflects the miniseries. I suspect it does.
Yeah, it does. It's very. I'm sure that it does. I mean, it's the hardcover of the collected edition of the miniseries. The interesting thing is, I ran into both of them in Terrificon, and we were talking about it. Okay, yeah. So, I'm sorry. Our guest.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, it was great. I got some behind the scenes stuff on what was supposed to be said or not said, and let me tell you, it's a great book, but the behind the scenes on this is really good. I don't know if they included any of that in there.
When you say they, who are you referring to?
Oh, I was talking to Tom and Phil. Like, I was walking around with Tom at Terrificon, and we went and saw Phil, and the thing I enjoyed the most about that interaction was that the two of them were both so genuinely happy to be talking to the other one and enjoyed what each of them had offered to the other in the collaborative experience. Tom bought some pages, because that's what he does. But anyway, that book's coming out this week, and we're gonna get our guest on, and we're going to talk about another book that's coming out this week. Well, we may talk about it, but he has a new number one coming out this week. This new Silver Surfer Rebirth Legacy with Ron Lim. It's interesting, and one of the things I said is I enjoy it when creators get a second chance to come back at properties, and Marvel's been doing that a lot lately. I'm not sure how much I love it, but I certainly enjoy the content that's being created. I'm not so much sure how much I love the idea of it. The just grasping at nostalgia. What's your thoughts on that?
My thoughts take me back to how Marvel used to do business, because they have this sort of league of characters who never really were able to hold on to their own books for very long periods of time, with some exceptions. Um, Nick Fury has been everywhere, but has also had a couple of hundred different runs of Nick Fury comics in one form or another. Doctor Strange is the same way. Um, so is Silver Surfer. Silver Surfer was just a total mind blast when he first came out in Fantastic Four. I had no idea where that was going, and as a little kid, and where it was going to lead us. So, I love the John Buscema series that came after that, but it's not often that he actually can carry his own story. Like the others I mentioned, he works quite well, bringing him in when necessary, for as long as necessary, to do what he does best. But to do it alone, that's a little difficult. And when you're dealing with these sort of cosmic characters, you tend to become kind of imprecise. So defining your character, particularly if there's any change involved, that's a challenge. And Ron has met that challenge before, and others have met that challenge before. It's always interesting to see how they pull it off. Not everybody does.
I some of my the first Silver Surfers that I read were the ones Ron wrote. By the time I started picking it up, it was right around the time that Starlin left and he took over. And I remember, I think Starlin wrote 50. I don't think Ron was credited on that, and he's probably going to correct me. But that was, I remember that was in the days of the special foil pages, and that was a special foil cover. So I think I have required that too. But I'm sorry. No, go ahead.
I once proposed to Image Comics. We were doing Shaman's Tears over there at the time. And all of these stunt covers were just going nuts. The foil covers, the 3D covers, and all this other crap, which would deflect from the fact that, there's actually good stories inside here, which always annoyed me about any comics stunt. They deflect from what's supposed to be the good stuff, which is the story. So I had suggested that we do a bubblegum cover, that we print the cover on bubblegum. And, there's a process where you can just sort of, mold that onto the comic book. It could have happened. They would have had to bag it. It would have been a very expensive and time-consuming operation. And I don't think we had the time to spend on it. So it didn't happen. I don't think that Image took me seriously, although Grell did.
Of course. Well, I think Mike will take anything you say seriously, because he genuinely knows that you have that adventurous spirit that is willing to do anything at any time, and why not?
Well, if it seems to me like it will communicate, it doesn't have to work necessarily, and I like taking chances and trying to go somewhere where it doesn't work. The journey just doesn't coalesce properly. But sometimes you get to pass through some really good stuff on the way, and you get to test your character's limits and some of their capabilities. So I do enjoy pissing in the soup.
I love this. I think this episode is going to be subtitled "Pissing in the Soup." And on that note, I'm going to.
What a segue!
It is, because there's something I kind of have something kind of along those lines set up for our guests. So let's bring him in. He's having some technical difficulties, folks. We may not get to be able to see him, but we're going to bring in our guest in just a minute. So everybody, just hang on, and here comes Ron Marz. Hey, Ron.
Gentlemen,
How are you?
after that bitchin' video introduction, now I feel like a jerk off because I can't get my camera to work.
That's all right. That's all right.
I think you look great.
Let's just assume that I'm sitting in a very dark room and I'm doing secret things.
Well,
Okay.
that sounds exciting. We just mentioned your new book coming out this week, Silver Surfer Rebirth Legacy. What's that about? Since it's topical.
About 20 pages.
About 20 pages. All
20
right.
pages. I assume that's the answer you expected.
That is exactly what I expected.
It is it's a sequel in large part to the Warlock series that we just finished.
Right.
Which obviously ended with, for anybody that picked up that issue of Warlock Rebirth #5, it ended with a splash of Surfer showing up to Legacy, Genis Vell, Captain Marvel's son, saying, "I need you." So this is basically what he needs for the rest of the series.
You had a miniseries that set up a miniseries.
Well, we had a miniseries that set up a miniseries that set up a miniseries.
Right.
So essentially, we have an ongoing series, but it's just broken up into a series of 5-issue minis, because that's kind of how comics work now.
Sure.
Well, it's true, because ultimately they're going to be anthologized into a trade paperback, maybe even a hardcover. So everybody uses a sort of 5 to 6 issue storytelling mode, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, unless you're taking a story. Unless you're taking a story that we used to tell in 20 pages, and you spread it out over 100.
Well, I hope that's not what I'm doing. I've been doing this long enough that I know that trick, and hopefully we're not doing it. So we try to make sure that I know how the magician pulls that rabbit out of his hat. But hopefully we're doing what I've done my whole career, which is try to make sure that you get a full ride in every issue, and then the issues go together to form a much bigger tapestry. And if we're doing miniseries, those miniseries go together to form a much bigger story. So I'm old school enough that I want to make sure that you feel like you're getting your $4 or $5 worth out of that single issue, and it doesn't read like a chapter that's not fulfilling in and of itself. I don't want to keep serving up appetizers when you're showing up expecting an entree.
That's right. The difficult part about the medium today is that there are so many comics out there, and so many of them really are good and certainly worth checking out, that it shortens the time you have to kind of prove that your story is worthwhile. If your third issue of a 5-issue miniseries sucks for whatever reason, and middle issues are tough, you may not get that reader back. And then the retailer will be stuck with unsold copies, and they're not going to like that. So it's a very tough responsibility to put together, like in a 5-issue miniseries, 5 exciting, important issues where the sum is greater than the parts.
Well, that's the job, right? I mean, that's
right.
And thankfully, I was taught my job by Jim Starlin, among others, who kind of took me under their wing and showed me how to do this thing. So ultimately the goal is to make sure that page 1 gives you something that you're excited about, And when you get to page 1, you go, what the hell's going on? I have to read. I have to keep going. And by the time you get to page 20 or page 22, when I learned this thing, you decided, oh shit, I got to come back for the next one because I have to find out what happens. That's serial fiction, no matter what we're doing, whether we're doing, pop boiler chapters in a pulp magazine or comics or TV episodes. It's and obviously you know this well, Mike. You have to serve two masters. You have to serve the issue that you're doing, and you have to serve the overall storyline that you're trying to tell. And I didn't, when I took over the book, when I took over Surfer 32 years ago now, whatever the hell it was, as Bob obviously remembers, that was just how you did the gig. That was part of the job. So hopefully I've learned it well enough to just keep doing it. Certainly I go to the store, I pick up paperbacks, and I do come across stuff that I feel like, man, if I was buying this issue by issue, I'd be pulling my hair out, because as a whole, it's an entertaining story. But for once a month, I'm getting an issue that doesn't satisfy me. I'm getting an issue that doesn't have enough meat on the bone, and that's a tough line to walk. And certainly as modern comics have become a little bit more talky and a little less actiony, I think you can often come away from an issue feeling unsatisfied because you didn't get Galactus eating Manhattan this time. You got Galactus talking about maybe eating Manhattan in 3 issues.
Sure. The morality of eating Manhattan. I would just wonder what type of a sauce I'd use. But yeah, I get that. It's really hard, particularly since you had mentioned something I think is critical. That first page, we used to call splash pages because the first page was always a splash page. It was usually a splash page. It no longer is necessarily. You look back at 1960s Marvel stuff, and Jack Kirby gave you a first page that you couldn't pass up. You had to read the rest of the book just because of that first page. But those were usually 1 issue, 2 issue, maybe 3 issue story arcs. And today it's so difficult to have to come up with that sort of first page exciting jump start to your story when you're already in the middle of that story. So it's hard.
I was, to a certain extent, I was running my mouth about this a little bit the other night on Twitter.
I saw that. I was going to bring it up. It was interesting.
That first page, and the comparison I made is to my days as a journalist, when I was 20 years old and still in college. Working at a daily newspaper, and your first paragraph, your lead, was half of why you got your paycheck.
Right.
If you could write a good lead, if you could pull the reader into your story and keep them going, I mean, you were worth your weight in gold. And I got fairly good at that. Because it was a necessity for the job. So by the time I got pulled into writing comics, when I was 22 or maybe 23, I guess probably 22, just a kid that still didn't know what the hell he was doing. I already got that concept. I got that concept of you got to hit the reader right between the eyes with that first page, so that they pick up that book and take it home. And I still subscribe to that theory in to great extent. Plus it's fun. I mean, plus the first page is fun. I mean, it's all fun, but the first page of your book is like, how can I show off? It is like the magician, pulling something really cool out of his bag of tricks. I'm going to do this cool thing, and you're not going to be able to put the book back on the rack. You're going to want to take it home. Same thing with the last page, which is I'm going to give you a holy shit moment at the end of the book that you say, oh my God, I have to wait 4 weeks to find out what happens. This is, life is unfair.
I have a similar background. I was in J school and I started out writing for local newspapers and that sort of thing, which I love and I still love, which is why I'm back to doing so much physical writing. But I'll tell you something. That is what cemented my relationship with Denny O'Neil on The Question. Denny and I had known each other for a very long time, but we hadn't worked together until The Question. And he went to J school. I think he went to Missouri, and he got to start in a St. Louis area newspaper in Cape Girardeau. And we would talk about our stories the way you just did. That first page is really the lead paragraph. Certainly the first 3 pages is the equivalent of your lead. The difference between now and way back when, 50 years ago, is that what Will Eisner said, you have to give the reader a reason to turn the page. Which was brilliant in the way he enunciated it and the way he showed examples, was quite a lesson. But now you also have to give readers a reason to come back. And you have an obligation to do that, not just for the reader's sake, although that's primary, but for the retailer's sake and for everybody who's involved anywhere in that food chain. It's now critical to motivate the reader to turn the page and buy the next issue. And the only way you do that is by pleasing the reader. Period. They got to have a good time.
Well, I think that I think there's also the factor of there are probably more good books on the stands now than there ever have been.
I think that's true. Yes.
So the competition for eyes and dollars is greater than it ever has been. Because not because we're trying to stand out next to a bunch of crap. It's it's like parking your new car next to a beaten up Chevy Malibu. That's not the case at all. Now there's a bunch of good stuff, and I think most readers, myself included, don't have the time and very often the funds to buy everything that we're gonna want to experience. So you have to make, particularly your first issue, I think, you have to make that worth the ride, and get them to come back. I know, it's reflected in any of the online reviews and interviews and all of that kind of stuff that, everybody gets hot and bothered for a number 1 issue. And then like next week or next month, when you have number 2 coming out, there's not as much interest. There's not as much buzz about it because everybody's talking about the next number 1 to come out, because we as an industry publish a shitload of number 1s because that's a sales tool.
Sure. I have a column called the number 1s. I can do it weekly.
That approach is exactly why we killed off The Question at the end of the very first issue. Now, this was a little bit before, killing characters became completely meaningless. But people did know the value of that number 1 on the cover. And I don't mean that from a collectible standpoint. I mean that from a storytelling standpoint. That number 1 means you're starting a journey. Maybe it's 5 issues. Maybe it's 100 issues. Maybe it's 100 issues that turns out to only be 5 issues. But you got to make them go, what the hell's going on here? I got to come back. I can't believe, as Bob said, I got to wait all this time. I mean, that's silly. And that's wonderful. We're selling heroin.
Geez, I hope so.
Listen, I've always referred to my comic shop employees as my dealers.
Well, they are dealers.
They are, but it was in the pharmaceutical sense that I always refer to it. It's great that you brought that up, because that was one of the things I wanted to talk about, where you were talking about your journalistic experience and how that made you more aware, or you feel it made you hyper aware of first pages. I want to talk a little bit about your journey, if you don't mind. And you mentioned Starlin. How did you get into writing comic books? Like, you went to J school, you were a journalist.
Well, I mean, the short answer is, I'm writing comics because Starlin said I should.
Well, it's not a bad reason. It's a very good reason.
Yeah, if Jim Starlin says, why don't you write comics? You go, okay. But I moved in that social circle. I was a kid, certainly, but I moved within that social circle of Jim Starlin and Bernie Wrightson, the rest of the Hudson Valley comics community, Terry Austin, Fred Hembeck, Joe Staten. Once in a while, Barry Smith would pop his head out. So I was hanging out with all those guys. Dan, the late Dan Green, which breaks my heart.
Sure. Yeah.
I saw Dan 2-3 times a week because I played racquetball with all those guys and went to the movies with all those guys. So I met Bernie because I was interviewing him. I interviewed him for my college newspaper. And he invited me to his legendary Halloween parties. I'm like at that point, I'm like a 19-year-old kid.
Right. Exactly.
And I, went to his house to drop off the copies of the college newspaper where it had my interview with him in it. And, Bernie's just the nicest guy in the world. He was literally maybe the nicest man I'd ever met in my life. And we were friends from that moment on, because he just was, he was the guy that, made sure you were included in everything. So
he was a very, very good guy, the type of person that you would seek out at a convention if just to say hello to, just to make sure that you had that contact, even if you both were very, very busy, you had panels and whatever, you'd still want to touch base because he was such a good guy. You would feel lesser if you didn't. So
the thing with Bernie is he didn't know he was Bernie Wrightson. I mean,
right.
Yeah. I would, because we did a number of projects together, Batman Aliens and a few other things. And, I had my buddy Bernie that I went for pizza and beers with and went to see like generally crappy horror movies with. And then, when we're working on something together, I'd go over to his studio and he'd be, like doing layouts for something that I wrote or whatever. And that stuff would just flow out of him. And I'd be like, holy shit, that's Bernie Wrightson.
Exactly.
So it was very odd to hold those two things in your brain at the same time. But had I never met Bernie, and had I never sort of screwed up my courage enough to go to this Halloween party, where I knew I didn't belong, I would not be doing this. We would not be having this conversation. But it occurred to me that I really wanted to go to this party, but I was a scared kid. But it occurred to me that nobody knew who anybody was at the party because everybody was in costumes. So
good point.
It didn't matter, and it was as I found out, it was also a lovely bunch of people who were welcoming and completely welcoming of anybody, particularly a 19-year-old kid. So that just it's sort of all flowed from there, and I sort of got pulled into that group because they were just lovely people who, despite the fact that I was a 19-year-old kid, said, hey, you're one of us. Come do this thing with us. So eventually I copy edited Jim's first prose novel. And he liked what I did well enough that his first prose novel was called Among Madmen, in which he killed me. And at that point, Jim said, "Hey, did you ever think about writing comics as a way to, as he said, put food on the table?"
Okay.
Which, duh, of course, but you don't actually get to do that.
No.
But Jim said, "Okay, well, come on out to the house and I'll show you how this works." And obviously, I was reading comics. And I was familiar with everything. I was familiar with who my friends were. Basically, I tweeted this the other night. Is that when Jim was writing and Bernie was penciling and Dan Green was inking the Weird for DC, those pages got passed from Bernie to Dan at our racquetball sessions. Like in the locker room, Bernie would hand over an envelope full of pages, and I would get to sit there and look at them before Dan took them home to ink them. So Jim showed me the ropes, co-wrote a few issues of Surfer with me, or I should say, he told me what to do and I wrote them, and then he went back and fixed them. And when Jim jumped off of Surfer to go work on this project nobody ever heard of again, called Infinity Gauntlet.
Right, exactly.
I don't know whatever happened to that, but I assume with much arm twisting, he got Marvel to turn Surfer over to me as a monthly book, and I have been writing comics literally ever since.
So 51 was your first solo, is that right?
49 was my first solo.
49. But and are you? I didn't think you were listed as co-writer on 50. Are you?
No, I didn't. I sort of put stuff in place on 49 because Jim was working on Infinity Gauntlet,
right,
because Perez needed more deadline time,
right,
which is why George ended up leaving that series halfway through and Ron Lim took over. So he was working on Infinity Gauntlet. I did 49. He came back and did 50. And then I took over at 51,
right, and
did like 6 or 8 issues that were all Infinity Gauntlet tie-ins, which
right
at the time I didn't even realize this, but at the time that was the best lesson I could have had in working in a shared universe, in working between the cracks of other books and making sure that you were telling your own story in and around other stories so that they all made sense, but that they all stood on their own.
Right. You touched on something that just happens to be my favorite part about working in comics. I started reading comics. I learned how to read with comics, but the best part about working here is that we're working in a donut shop. I made a speech about this at the Harvey Awards in Baltimore about 10 years ago. It's a small coffee donut shop place, where everybody's sort of sitting around grumbling about work, but forming friendships and bonding. And no matter where you go, those relationships stay. This is the only business I've ever been in. I've been in broadcasting and journalism and politics and all kinds of crazy stuff, where people that you hate and who hate you are still on a first name basis. And there's something kind of comforting about being in that type of environment, particularly today when it seems like everybody just hates everybody. It's very comforting.
It's like, to a certain extent, everybody knows everybody in this business,
right?
Certainly after a while, like I'll be at Baltimore, as I know you guys will, in a few days, and that's like a family reunion. Like everybody,
it is.
Everybody who works in this business eventually makes their way to Baltimore. And it's true. I think it's funny because with all this new social media platforms popping up here and there, being some pop culture squad needing to have a space wherever we end up. There's about 200 of us out there. There's about 200 people who are easily going to be the people who follow me. That's not a lot of people, that are active or have been active in the comics, writers, artists, and stuff like that.
I think the rule of thumb is that there are more NBA players than there are people making a full-time living in comics.
That's true. I believe that's 100% true.
So that's what are there, about 660 NBA folks?
Mm-hmm.
There are certainly far more professional baseball players in the major leagues and professional football players in the NFL than there are people making a full-time living in comics. Which is one, this is a small community, and two, it's harder and harder to make a full-time living in comics.
Exactly.
It is show business in the sense that everybody who wants to be in, and if you're reading comics long enough, at some point, chances are at least 50-50 that you're going to want to get in. It's okay, but for every great guitar player that you hear on the radio, back when radio played guitar music, there were 100 Eric Claptons out there in the garage who never got out of the garage. So I think that there's this huge group of potentially great people that either we've scared away or somehow they decided that they would rather, earn a living and buy a house and a car than just produce comics.
The generations below me don't think they're going to actually buy houses.
That's true.
I want to pick up something that you mentioned, Ron, and you kind of you leave these openings for me. Like these first 20 minutes of this have been all like everything I want to talk about. We're kind of hinting at. So when you talked about working in a shared universe, I kind of want to talk, and I want to kind of expose people to you who don't have the experience. But when you had the opportunity to leave Marvel and work for DC, and you went over and you took over Green Lantern, what was the pitch there, and how did that come about? Like, part of the question is, was the plan for Parallax already in place? Because it's kind of a similar thing where you took over, Hal left, and then Kyle was there. So how did that process work? Was that the intent from the beginning?
Yeah, I mean, I went from Marvel to DC, but I didn't leave Marvel for a while. I was writing Surfer and Green Lantern and a book at Image all at the same time, which is kind of a thing that doesn't happen anymore.
No, but it's a smart way to go.
Philip does it.
You have to dance with one of the girls, not both of them.
No,
and
Philip's the only one who does it, really.
Yeah, Phil. When Phil got the Hulk gig, he called me and he was like, "Hey, what? This is weird. Is this? How did you do it?" And I was like, you just be faithful to two masters. I wish it was a little more common than it is, because I think that cross pollination is good. I think it's good for business. It's good for and it's good for the companies creatively. But in my case, I had done a little bit of stuff here and there at DC, like short Green Lantern Corps stories, Green Lantern Corps Quarterly,
right?
And they liked it well enough to let me stick around, and I know that they were reading Surfer, and obviously liked what I was doing there, because they just it was a bit of a different era in which you just got a call and they said, "Hey, do you want to do this book?" There was no pitching, there was no Pillsbury Bake Off to between 6 creators to see who was going to get the gig. It was just, do you want to do this? So I got a call fairly late one evening, like, I don't know, 8:00 or something like that, at home. Actually having been down at the Marvel offices for most of the day, fighting with my Thor editor. So I got home, we went out for pizza, and then when I got back, there was, the phone rang, and it was Kevin Dooley from DC. And he said, "I'm in the room with Denny O'Neil and Mike Carlin and Archie Goodwin and Paul Levitz. And I was like, oh shit, this is either really good or really bad.
Yeah, either way. It could go either way.
There's not a lot of middle ground if all those guys are still at the office 8:00 at night. And they offered me Green Lantern, and I said, yeah, that'd be cool. I'd love to do it. I love that whole Gil Kane Hal Jordan costume, and the Hal is basically Chuck Yeager with a flight ring, and this is going to be cool, and I want to get back to that right stuff sort of stuff. And they went, yeah, wait a minute. Hang on. So they explained to me what we were going to do, and that they wanted
was presented.
They were explaining to me that they wanted a different direction, a different lead character for the book that I was going to be making up. Those were the marching orders. So I had to kind of think about it a little bit. I probably took a week or so to think about it.
Really?
And finally said, yeah, let's do this. And I took it on, and realized that, oh boy, this is going to be, this is going to generate some heat. This is not going to be just, issue 48 is my first issue, and it creeps out onto the stands and nobody really notices it. This is going to be a thing that's going to light some fires.
It's an expensive book today.
I guess. I mean, I should look in boxes downstairs. I probably have most of my comps sitting there.
It is. I didn't realize that Kyle was introduced in that first issue, and it's up there. His first appearance is worth something.
You know that one of our columnists, one of our fellow columnists over at Pop Culture Squad, wants to be Kyle when he grows up.
Well, that's a fine thing to be, but I don't see any real plus in growing up. So,
right, I agree with that. He's got 4 kids, so I can understand why he wants to grow up.
Stay that up as long as possible.
But Mark Allen Fishman is the biggest fan of Kyle's I've ever known.
Well, obviously, he's a man of taste and erudition. They just, beyond the first reader, beyond Emerald Twilight,
right.
And they gave me a page and a half at best outline of this is what we want these issues to be. And it was pretty loose. It was, here's some stuff that's going to happen, and then you go create a new Green Lantern. And that's really what it was. Go create a new Green Lantern. There was not a lot of detail. There was no detail. In fact, there was no.
Was there any pushback on why he couldn't use Guy or John, or had to go create new?
Well, not from me, because I was,
right.
I was excited because I was getting to play with all the toys.
Sure.
But without any of the baggage. Like, I was getting the franchise, but not the continuity baggage that you have anytime you pick up a franchise. So, I got to create my own lead character and mold him to be what I wanted, along with Darryl Banks, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And have my cake and eat it too in a lot of ways. So DC really didn't give a lot of direction in terms of who this new character was going to be, which obviously, this is 25 years ago or going on 30 years ago. That's not a boon that you would be given these days. There would be all sorts of people involved in deciding what sort of character needed to take over the lead of the book. But for us, it was just, we just made up stuff. I basically, decided that I wanted a Marvel style character, in the DC universe, because most of DC's heroes were authority figures, were like your dad's heroes.
Mm-hmm.
So Kyle was very much
an artist,
was very much cut from the the everyman archetype of Peter Parker, and more than that, Charlie Chaplin. I mean, to me, Charlie Chaplin's the everyman. He's you whenever you see any of those the full-length Chaplin features. The world happens to him and you root for him. So that's what we brought hopefully to the table with Kyle, is somebody that you could see yourself in his shoes.
Absolutely.
And you could be you could be the one that won the lottery, right? Like, we wanted Kyle to be enough of a screw up that at least initially, that you could kind of see yourself being in that position. He was very much
could have been you that they
right? It's not you're not gonna see yourself in the shoes of the last son of Krypton. You're not gonna see yourself in an orphan nobleman in Gotham City who's like half a sociopath. Those aren't characters that you inhabit, but hopefully
only half,
mostly.
Hopefully Kyle is a character that you can inhabit, that you project yourself into, and I think that was a bit of a new thing for the DC universe at that point.
No, I totally agree. I think you nailed it. I think the thing about Kyle that was, he was perfect for when he was created. You definitely took the pulse of what the world was like and what the world needed. And I think that he was very much a breath of fresh air at the time that he was created. And I think that leads to his success. I think that was one of the things that made him, stick and be, there's a whole generation of people who he's their Green Lantern. You've done that.
Sure. Yeah, it's like having your own, doctor in Doctor Who, except that this runs longer, or at least used to.
Well, I think exactly. I think certainly there's a generation for whom Kyle is their Green Lantern.
Right.
There's a generation for whom Hal is their Green Lantern, or John, because they saw him on the Justice League show.
Sure.
All of that to me is one of the coolest things about Green Lantern, because you get to pick your own. For the most part, if you're picking Superman or Batman, you get one flavor, unless you're one of those weirdos who likes Azrael Batman. Overall, Green Lantern is one of the few franchises where everybody gets to pick their dish off the buffet table, and it's flattering for me and very pleasing to me that some people feel like Kyle is their Green Lantern.
You mentioned something that I just realized the timing on something that you kind of mentioned. Yes, it's Kyle is their Green Lantern, and Hal might be my generation's Green Lantern. And the people who feel that way about Alan are mostly dead. But part of the reason why
Jack's one of them.
Yeah, I like the dude too, but nonetheless, one of the reasons why Batman was so successful in the days when superheroes were not successful was because he was the one that you could relate to. You only had like 5 or 6 superheroes, costumed heroes to choose from. But if you weren't born on Krypton and you can't melt a candy bar from 200 miles away, you're not going to be Superman. If you're not an Amazon, let alone a woman, you're not going to be Wonder Woman. But Batman had no superpowers. So you, as a kid, and our readers were younger then, you kind of felt, well, I could be Batman because I wasn't born on Krypton. I don't have superpowers. I just, if I work hard enough, I could be Batman. And by the time that you took over Green Lantern, you could still be Batman. You just didn't want to be, no matter how much you liked Batman, because he had a lot of issues. He had more issues than he had publications, and he's had a lot of publications. So, I think that there's this breath of fresh air at that moment, too. Comics were getting to be a little dark and kind of cynical because the creators were kind of dark and cynical, and most of us still are. But
I was born cynical, though.
Well, I have a subscription. But still, you're not going to want to grow up to be Batman.
Right.
You might want to grow up to be Kyle. That would
I'm certainly Batman is, not a happy guy. At least
No.
in the way that I view him. In the Batman that I'm aware of, or the version of it that I stick with. You don't want to be Batman because that's pretty grim. Kyle was, to me, and in fact, I had years ago, I had this conversation with Jeff Johns up in the DC offices, back when DC had offices in New York, the Letterman Theater. And when Jeff was up there and we were pals and I bumped into each other, and, we ended up talking about Green Lantern for obvious reasons. And
sure.
And, he said, you made the first successful Marvel style character in the DC universe in Kyle. Maybe I think there's a certain amount of truth to that. I think you can also look at, the Teen Titans as a whole, or the new Teen Titans as a whole, was very much a Marvel book.
Sure. That's fair.
When Marv and George were doing it. And I think Firestorm was, to a certain extent, a Marvel book, or had that vibe to it. But it was, certainly it was more of a Marvel book Kyle was more of a Marvel type character than a DC type character.
Sure.
And Bob, you mentioned that, I had my finger on the pulse, and none of that's true. I mean,
yeah,
I could say it was, but I wrote the character I wanted to read about, and
that's fair.
That's the only way I've ever approached this job. Is what story do I want to read?
But Ron, you have to remember, you
can I get away with it?
You weren't 30 then, right? You were in your 20s at that point.
Oh yeah, I didn't know what the hell I was doing, but
right. But that's the point.
It certainly didn't stop me. Still doesn't.
No, and thank God for that, because none of us knew what we were doing back when we thought we knew what we were doing. And then later on, by doing it, we found out that we didn't know.
All right. Next question. I got to move on to this one, because this is along those same lines. Because again, we keep doing this. So there's something that I've noticed, or something that I've always known. There's a hallmark to your writing that if you read a Ron Marz story, it will be technically sound. There's a hidden structure to storytelling that most people don't see. And when people write 100% emotional stories and don't pay attention to the structures that need to be there, that's when they fall apart. And how conscious of structure are you as you're evolving a story? Because like I said, I'm trying to say this in a way that you don't become offended, that if I don't want to say that your stories are only technically good. They're amazingly good in so many ways, but there is that underlying structure that keeps it from falling in a lot of ways. Do you think about that as you're going? Like, I can't do this because it's not structurally sound.
Not in any sort of front of my brain
okay
way. I mean, I know what needs to go into a story to make it, make it good in what I perceive to be good. So, and I know, part of that is just understanding all the stuff that needs to go into a single issue in order to make it accessible to as wide an audience as possible. In terms of, you introduce the characters and you introduce the situations and you have some cliffhangers and, all of that sort of checklist stuff. Like, I get all that stuff. I think part of that comes from journalism, because journalism is about taking a whole bunch of information, a big stack of information, and figuring out how to arrange it into a story that will engage the reader and get all of the necessary details in there. That is to great extent what a single issue of a comic is.
Yes.
I got all of this stuff that I need to get into the issue. How do I arrange this in a fashion that is enticing to the reader? And in most cases, the reader is me. Like, how do I think this is cool?
One of the things that's interesting, you bring that up, in that's the way journalism is supposed to be. If you read journalism today, they do that in the first two paragraphs, and the rest of it is just re-explaining what they told you in the first two paragraphs. Right.
Yeah, well, certainly to a certain extent, the journalism has become, this is what I think, which is not journalism. It's,
right.
I just read op-ed. Yeah, I mean, and it's more accepted as, but it's op-ed, but it's accepted as actual journalism. I just read a review of the last episode of Justified, which is one of my favorite TV series ever.
I have not watched the new one yet.
I have not seen the last episode, so
be
cool.
I will tread lightly. But so I wanted to, and generally I don't read reviews. I just, I don't give a shit what you think. I'm just concerned with what I think. So, but I wanted to read a couple of reviews of the last episode because there was a piece that I thought was missing, and I wanted to make sure that it was actually missing, and that I didn't look past it. And turns out, there was a piece that was slightly missing. It doesn't really affect the enjoyment of it. But it was there was something that I wanted. Again, talking about structure, there was something I wanted to call back to, and it wasn't in there. So the first paragraph of that review was, well, here's what happened. And the rest of the review by this reviewer, who's a TV writer, was, here's what I think they should have done.
Oh, well, let's screw you. I don't care about that.
I don't care what you think. What you think.
That's right.
When you get to make a TV show, by all means, do what you think. But until then, your job is to tell us how successful what was put on the screen was. So anyway, that's my
No, it's fair.
Journalism.
I agree with you 100% on that.
But ultimately, the structure, or at least perception of structure, that you see in my stories is because I understand the pieces that have to get in there to make a satisfying whole in 20 pages. At least I think I do. And a good part of it is just, all right, you have these pieces to a puzzle. Telling a story, particularly in comics, is like putting a puzzle together. You have a bunch of different pieces, and you have to figure out how they best fit together over 20 pages to provide the best experience.
I agree.
That's fantastic. The journalism background helps in another way, and it doesn't sound like it's a creative way, but it winds up being creative. And that is the respect for, or the inevitability of, the deadline. You realize that you have to, you're not writing a book. You don't have forever or a year or two to tell your story. At a certain point in time, the bell is going to go off and you have to finish up. And that, if you're practiced at it, that gives you something to shoot for. That's why so many writers, particularly with a journalism background or a broadcasting background, that's why so many of us wait to the last minute, because that pressure it only comes at the last minute, and that pressure, for me at least, that pressure is very exciting. It clears the cobwebs. It allows me to do some really kind of bold and maybe nasty stuff, but it's mine, and I have to deliver. And here's the motivation.
I don't really like that. I got to do it now thing. I mean, certainly I've been in that position plenty. I'm in that position tonight, in fact. But this business is creativity on demand.
Right.
Yep.
The grind of this business is unlike virtually any other creative writing you can do. It's got to get done, and certainly because you are the first person in the chain as the writer. You're the engine, and none of the other cars can leave the station until you pull out. So the artist can't draw a damn thing, and the colorist can't do anything, and the letterer can't do anything until you do your job. So to me, that's the pressure that I feel is I got to make sure everybody else is working.
That's a good pressure.
The cardinal sin in this business is to leave the artist without pages to draw.
That's right.
And certainly, like when I started in this business, that was very much that was drilled into your head. Like, I get it. And also just from the point of view of, being a good person and making sure that the next guy in the chain can pay his rent. That was drilled into you. I think it's a little less drilled into people now, because certainly when I started, if we didn't have 2 issues of Green Lantern complete in the drawer, I got a call from Bob Greenberger saying, what's going on? Let's come on, move it. Now we skin the issue out on the day that it's got to go to press, maybe making lettering and coloring tweaks on that last day.
Yeah.
And as long as that thing goes to press on that last day, you're golden. So it's
That's right.
It's a different, it's a different world because we have very different technology.
And technology has driven a lot of that because, back in the good old days, you'd write up your script and put it in the mail and move on. And when we started up First Comics, Federal Express just went into business. So now that you couldn't screw around with your deadlines very much, we could get the script to the artist a lot faster because of that. But you as the writer don't have, that float time of the mail. You put it in FedEx and it's there the next day. And then we came up with a computer. And the computer totally said, oh no, we'll give it to him right now. Just show us all what you've got right now. And if you don't have anything, you've got nothing to show. And that puts another type of pressure on there. You got to learn how to make that pressure work for you.
It's well, like I said, it's creativity on demand, and I much prefer being able to have a few days before I got to turn the thing in, let it sit there and go back and read it and be a little more relaxed about it. That's not always the case by any means. It's not always the case. So you roll with it, but a big part of the gig is to manage your own schedule and don't stake anybody else out on the anthill. Don't screw anybody else in the midst of your deadline haze, because when I screw up a deadline, it rolls downhill to everybody else, and
That's
somewhere
right.
down the road, the colorist or the letter is getting screwed, like really bad. I don't think anybody in the chain is more important than another. But but I do think there's more responsibility on the writer to understand what everybody else's job is and to make sure that you're conducting yourself in a fashion that makes it as easy as possible for them to do their jobs.
I wish
The
more
writer
writers felt
is
that way.
the writer is the person who pushes that snowball down the mountain. And if you don't push it down the mountain, nothing else is going to happen. We're a collaborative medium, and that's great. But we're also a sequentially collaborative medium. And that is a pressure that I think is pretty unique to comics. In movies, it's not so sequential. Everybody's sort of involved and everybody's bitching, and it's amazing that anything ever happens. But in comics, it's like you write it, and after you may be talking with your artist, you may be talking with your colorist, and that's great. And the editor may be doing a lot of that stuff too. But you got to do it, or nobody else gets paid, and sooner or later you won't either.
Yeah, you are very much the architect of your success or your demise in this business.
That's right.
Which I guess it's relatively fair. You prove yourself every day in this business.
You got to know when to not be Peter Pan. Peter Pan pays the rent. Peter Pan gets you the work. Peter Pan is a creative force. But at some point, various points along the way, you're going to have to act like an adult, whether you want to or not.
Yeah, it's a business in which we get to play, but it's a business.
That's right.
So I want to change. There's a bunch of stuff I want to do, but we're getting out of time. So I just want to bring this up back for Ron. I don't know if you were there, but this is the time and place you need to be at 5:00 on Friday, because this is the panel we're going to do about getting into character. And I want to tease for the audience, anybody who wants to show up there, that it's going to be very interesting. One of the questions we're going to talk about is that someone on this panel took one of your characters that you created and played with him.
A couple of them, actually.
Well, true, but like I want to. I guess that's fair, but I think that's going to be interesting because like it's also I mean in the concept of this panel where you're going to talk about characters that you were able to play with and how that worked out, but plenty of people who've on this have written characters after you. I was thinking mostly about Tom's use of Kyle.
Yeah, you are forever standing on the shoulders of the people that came before you in this business.
Sure.
And that's a knife that cuts both ways.
Right.
I'm glad you showed me that because I had no idea when this panel was.
Well, I was about to. I'm gonna tweet it or post it, but soon.
As long as it doesn't interfere with me seeing Springsteen, I'll do anything you want.
It's Friday, so we're good.
Like I said, it's a knife that cuts both ways, and that we all create this stuff, and then it goes into the big collective, and anybody can play with it and do whatever they want with it within the bounds of editorial saying, yeah, go do that. So despite the fact that Kyle is ours in the sense of myself and Daryl Banks, he's not ours, he's DC's, and they can do whatever the hell they want with him, and will certainly, which is okay. We all add to this collective storytelling pot, and then sometimes they do stuff that you're not crazy about, but you gotta be okay with it. That is the bargain you make when you sign the voucher, frankly.
Sure.
If you're not keen on what they're going to do with a character once you turn them over, don't do it, because it's not yours anymore.
Well, the Beatles are an example of that. This is a group, 4 people, and you add them up, it's like 12. But they're really just 4 people. They're each individuals. They have their own individual style of writing and style of performing. And some people in the group didn't like everything that other people did. There's a song there that somebody would really like, and another one would go, geez, I really don't like that song. And when it came down to recording it, which is a creative process, it is not you're just doing it as written. There's a lot of interplay there. They each performed their role and joined in the collective role completely, whether they liked it or not. Comics has that same sort of an attitude. You're going to create something, if you're creating something that is not creator-owned, totally different business. But if you're working for Marvel or for DC, or you're doing an issue of Spawn or whatever, you're doing it that way. And they, whomever they may be, are going to define what that way should be. And, you may think that way is full of it. It's terrible. And you may wind up doing some of your best work doing it that way. You never know.
It's you always hope that the alchemy of the collaboration that you're involved in is, you produce something, you produce a whole that's greater than the individual parts.
Right.
And I have been very blessed in my career to have done that a fair amount. I've been my bucket list of artists I've yet to work with is very small. So I've worked with a huge number of people who have elevated my work in every way, because I am still a firm believer in your story is only good as good as the person drawing it. I write a brilliant script full of Shakespearean pathos and David Lean vistas and John Woo action, and they give it to somebody who's not any good at sequential art. That story's going to suck. And by the same token, I write a mediocre script and they hand it to Garcia Lopez and Kevin Nolan, and I'm a genius. So
that's fair.
So you ride the coattails of your art team for better or worse all the time, and I've been very fortunate to have been better. There's no rhyme or reason to why it works or it doesn't work. Sometimes you click with certain people and you don't click with other people. There are artists that I've worked with that are terrific artists that just didn't share my sensibility, or I didn't have their sensibility in storytelling, in design, whatever it was. And the thing that we did together is not bad, but it just lays there. And I've worked with artists that you end up creating this thing that you both sit back and look at and go, holy shit, how did we do that? Like, where did that come from? And that's the reason that we still do this. That's the reason that we grind out the long hours and the ridiculous deadlines and the not great pay in the long run is chasing that experience, chasing that alchemy. And I will probably do that till they put me in a box. I don't mean a long box. I mean the other kind of box.
Yeah, that's fine. I want to talk about this, and I want to switch gears just a little bit because for those people who don't know, if you haven't rolled credits on Diablo 4, Ron Marz is part of the writing team on that video game, and you and I have talked about it a little bit, in our conversations. What's that experience like? Because it is a collaborative experience as well. What have you gained from that, from working on Diablo?
it's a very different experience than video games is a very different experience than comics, because I do a comic, and the comic is me and 5 of my closest friends.
Sure.
And we make this thing, and it appears, I don't know, a month after we actually finish the damn
maybe
thing.
3 months,
maybe less,
maybe less,
maybe less, very often less. So you have this you have this very tight group, and you do the thing, and it comes out, and then you're doing the next thing. It's fast paced, and there aren't a lot of people in the mix to do it. So that's comics. Video games is me and 600 of my closest friends, many of whom I've never met and don't have any interaction with whatsoever. And somehow all of those people come together and make this game over a period of 5 or 6 years. And everybody does their little bit. Everybody does their part. And somehow at the end of it, we wind up with this vast multi-million-dollar game franchise. I am still somewhat baffled as to how that happens. Baffled in a good way. But I've been really, really happy working with Blizzard. They treat us great. We have all the resources in the world to do this. We have the time to do it. It's an absolute pleasure to work for them. And I know, PR wise, they've had some rough goes, and there have been some stormy seas for Blizzard in the last few years. But my experience has been nothing but exceptional, frankly. And I'm really happy to be part of the team. And I've worked on video games before. I've worked with the local developer here in Albany, which was called Vicarious Visions. I've done work for them going back 10, 12 years on Marvel games and Skylanders games and all sorts of stuff. They would bring me in on a contract to help out. And then Blizzard, they were part of Activision already, the Activision Blizzard. And they decided that the whole studio was going to be a Blizzard studio. So we are all working on Diablo. A couple of people in the studio working on Overwatch, but virtually the entire building is working on Diablo. And they brought me in on a contract for a year. And at the end of the year, they said, "Hey, do you want to just keep doing this? We'll just, I was basically a full-time employee anyway, because that's what the contract was for. But it was nothing changed, but they formalized it with a staff position, which didn't change a whole lot. I still generally sit here in my house, except for a few days in the office during the week, and make up stuff."
You told me that there's something coming, and people who are watching, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but I'm going to say, you told me there's something coming in season 2 that you're extremely proud of.
It's not season 2. It is the first expansion.
It's in the expansion.
Expansion 1, which
doesn't have a date. It doesn't have a date yet.
Well, I know what the date is, but you don't.
I don't have. We don't have the date.
And
I just know season 2 starts in October.
And if I mentioned it to you, someone would come and knock on my door.
Yeah, so we're not going to do
Yeah, we're not gonna do that part.
The funny thing is, it'll be Kevin Feige.
Yeah. Well, it's it has been so when you work on a game, you work on cinematic scenes, you work on cut scenes, you work on dialogue during quests, you work on the overall story. Like you are involved in a great many things.
Sure.
But
it's a very complicated game. I mean,
it's there's a lot going on. There's a ton of moving parts. There's a ton of meetings, and all of which is great. It's a very cool thing, and certainly it's a different discipline than comics. So I get to stretch some different muscles doing it.
Right.
But ultimately, at its core, it's the same thing. It's telling stories with characters that hopefully we make you care about, so that you have to keep going to find out what happens. That's to me, that's the prize that you keep your eyes on all the time. Is it's engaging the reader in a way that or in this case the player, in a way that makes them want to keep doing it.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's very successful. It's probably the best game I've ever played. I haven't played a whole lot, but it's definitely like I could play this game forever.
Well, good, because that's kind of the plan, is to keep making it forever.
Sure.
And without I obviously I'm not going to sit here and say, oh well, that game's not very good. I'm proud of the work we've done, and I think the story is very engaging. To my mind, the story is very engaging, and I'm really pleased with the characters that we've created. There are more characters coming that I think are going to be pretty attractive to the people in the gaming community. But it's there are so many similarities to comics, in that it's serial storytelling, and we dole out a little bit more of the story every time we release a new expansion or season. It's the same thing, and it's a completely different thing. I'm really glad that I can do both, because comics give you the opportunity to very much tell your story, and video games, you get an opportunity to tell our story, to tell a story that's generated by the entire narrative team. It's a different experience, but it's no less enjoyable.
Yeah, you also, your relationship with the reader or with the gamer is very different between those two. In a comic book, they're reading a story that you've done, and I mean that in the plural. But the gamers, are participants in that storytelling. They make decisions, which buttons to press and what to do and all that. And you have to think about that. You have to incorporate that into your thinking. What if they, want to go a different direction? And how you keep that straight amazes me. And by you, I don't mean you. I mean the 600 of you. That's just an astonishing feat to me.
It's a really intriguing process, because it is like in comics, obviously, I'm the god of that universe. Whatever I say happens.
Right.
Which is good. I like that part. I like being in charge. And in a video game, in a lot of ways, the player is the god of that universe, because the player's choices and what the player decides to do dictates how that story unfolds. So the real job is to make sure that story unfolds in a fashion that they're still getting the emotional content and the character driven stuff that we want them to get, but they're also getting the experience of running around killing a bunch of stuff and getting treasure. That's and the other thing certainly that I've learned in this process is that different players want different things. Some of them are there for the story and they want to experience that, and some of them just want to run around and kill a bunch of demons and get as much treasure as they can. Everybody approaches it slightly differently, and you want to be able to serve all of those methods and still have everybody get everything that you want them to get out of the game.
Ron, let me ask you a question then. Do you think that your experiences doing video games has made you a better comic book writer?
That's an interesting question. I have not considered that. I think it probably has helped in that you generally have, they're both visual storytelling, right? There's stuff going on that you have to be a companion to, and I think one of the really cool things about writing a video game is that you have these cinematic scenes that are basically little mini movies, little animated, full animation, computer generated imagery where you're writing a movie essentially. And I found that because of the space limitations that you have in comics, and the real estate limitation that you have, the sense that every page and every panel has to count,
Right.
Sometimes you can't be as subtle as you want to be because subtle takes up space. In a cinematic sequence, you can be subtle as long as you don't go overboard. You can underplay things. You can let what you're not saying be the point of the sequence, because you have really good actors delivering that dialogue in your game. In a comic, obviously, all of the dialogue is delivered by the reader, right? And
Right.
and they're not always going to deliver it the way you want them to. You don't have any control over that process. In a video game, these are living, breathing characters because they're being brought to life by voice actors. One of the voice actors that I worked with, I did a lot of in voice sessions. I think I got another one tomorrow, in fact. Was the Welsh actor Ralph Ineson, who was the father in The Witch, and he's got this deep, rumbly Welsh accent.
He's fantastic.
And so, like, you go into a session with him, and you're just kind of shooting the shit, and talking about, I think when we recorded with him one time, he was in Italy shooting a movie, and he was in a different studio, and you're just having a chat, and then it's time to work, and this other person comes into the room. Like, this character that he's created comes into the room, and you're just like, holy shit, it's the voice of God all of a sudden. And so you have the ability, particularly when you're in the session, to help not dictate what that performance is like, but to get input into how you want that performance to come and what's going on behind the character's eyes, so to speak. And it's a really cool process. And the voice actors that we get are just all amazing. They really create these characters and make your dialogue come to life. I was in a session last week with an actress for a part that I had written, and it's the only thing I can compare it to. So the only thing I can compare it to, when you hear a really good actor deliver your dialogue and bring that to life and bring that character to life, it's it's the same sort of feeling you get when the art pages come into your inbox on a comic.
Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting.
Because like before that, it's just some shit that you wrote, right? It's words on paper. And once it goes to somebody else, in the case, a voice actress or the artist that you're working with, it becomes real. They breathe life into it. And that moment of getting that life breathed into your work while, when you're there, when you experience it for the first time, it's really amazing. It's just, there's nothing like it.
Oh, I've had a little experience in that area. I've done some voice acting, including last year, and some writing for radio theater, for radio drama. And it's such a wonderful medium because you can develop absolutely everything, but it's all going to be put together inside the person's head. They're the mixing board for everything that you do. And 5 people get in a room, listen to the same thing, you have 5 totally different reactions. And that's kind of fun.
Yeah, it's the whole thing is a pleasure. And it's in either case, your work comes to life because you're working with somebody else.
Yeah.
Right.
Listen, I have probably 5 more things that I want to get to, but we're not going to have time for that. So I want to end this on a pleasant note. And I think this is going to be pleasant for Mike, but let's talk about Lawrence of Arabia.
Oh, we could talk for 3.5 hours about Lawrence of Arabia.
This is Mike doesn't know this, but Ron exposed himself on Twitter yesterday or so that this is one of his favorite movies of all time. I want your opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Did you see it in the theater?
Oh yeah, I'm that old, and I'm a huge Peter O'Toole fan, and that was enough for me to just love the movie. My late wife was a huge Lawrence of Arabia fan, starting with the movie, but she read everything the real guy ever wrote and all the history books and stuff. So that was a topic that was often of discussion here. It's a hell of a story. The what if scenarios are just amazing that spin off of that. So for me, it's sort of a touchstone of storytelling opportunity. Why do you ask?
Well, I asked because I know Ron likes it, and I figured you guys could geek out over it.
I see. You want to do an adaptation of Lawrence of Arabia, Ron?
Oh man,
for
yeah.
Comics?
Got to be widescreen though, right?
Yeah.
Got to do it in landscape format.
That would work.
Yeah,
that
I mean,
would work.
If you put a gun to my head and said you only get to watch one movie for the rest of your life,
that's the one, huh?
It would either be Raiders of the Lost Ark or Lawrence. So obviously I have a desert thing going on. Not really, I don't grasp. But yeah, I mean, I my favorite movie is Raiders. Though I know that Lawrence is a better movie than Raiders, but Raiders is much more me. But yeah, I always say that Raiders and Lawrence are my 1 and 2, and I never get tired of it. And because it all works. I love David Lean. I love O'Toole. It's a movie like no other, I think, and I can't imagine how they actually filmed it. I mean, it's just insane that what is up there was there. They did all that stuff. There's no green screen involved.
No.
Yeah,
that is so true. It's like putting your head into King Kong. It's amazing even by today's standards, but at the time, holy crap.
I'm gonna be honest. I didn't see it until a few years ago. It was the first time I ever saw the whole movie. It had been on, and there were the people around. I just never took the time to say I'm going to watch it. I knew it was a movie that I should watch, And watching it for the first time as a full adult in the 21st century, I'm still amazed at that movie. I think it's like, to be honest, it is. I'm amazed that it was made when it was made. You know, I think I could get my kids. I might, probably not, but I could try to get my kids to watch it.
Well, look, it's in color. Come on.
They don't. One of them doesn't watch anything prior to 2000.
Yeah, that. How old? How old?
Well, it's Luke. He's
Okay,
18,
well,
so there you go. He wasn't born.
All right.
It's only
he's getting to the point where one day he's going to discover that there was this whole thing called life before him, and he will be amazed at how much good shit there is out there that he'd overlooked, that he hadn't seen, that he could have seen, but he wasn't old enough to appreciate. Not the story, the medium.
Sure. So what is it about? What is it about that movie that gets you, Ron?
I'm not even sure.
That's fair.
I can remember my first exposure to it.
When was that?
Was on the 4:30 movie.
Okay.
On Channel 7.
Okay. Yep.
Out of New York City, WABC, and they had the 4:30 movie. So every, as a kid, I would generally watch those movies if I wasn't outside playing. You got 4:30 movie, and it was generally an hour and a half with commercials. So something like Lawrence was, cut up over 3 days.
Yeah.
And I can remember seeing that for the first time on that channel, and just being fascinated by the vistas and the story, and frankly the action of it, and then sort of realizing, oh, this is true, this actually happened, this is a real thing. So I was always and then moved on to Dr. Zhivago and Bridge on the River Kwai. I was very much a David Lean guy, and when they restored Lawrence and rescreened it in theaters, I went down to Manhattan, probably 18, 19 years old or something like that. Stood in a snowstorm outside the Ziegfeld Theater to see an afternoon matinee of Lawrence of Arabia. All 3.5 hours of it with the intermission. In 70 millimeter, with the overture, with the whole thing. And it was just one of the most breathtaking film experiences I've ever had, because the screen just swallowed you up. It was so big.
And you saw it at one of the best venues in Manhattan. I missed that theater.
Yeah, sadly, I saw more than one film there, certainly, but sadly gone. And now look, when when it comes on television, I just get sucked in every time. Even though I have all of the the DVDs and the Blu-ray box set and all of that stuff comes on, I am helpless before its thrall. So, like I said, like obviously between that and Raiders, the desert is something that I fixate on for reasons that I don't know. But my
big Dune guy.
Oh yeah, I loved not so much the David Lynch one because that's a mess, but I loved the new one. Just gorgeously filmed. I think Denny's the best director working now. So I'm due to go back to Abu Dhabi in December. So
is that a show? Is there a show there?
Yeah, there's a show. Went to Abu Dhabi in May for a book expo with a publisher called Sandstorm that is basically the UAE comic publisher. They're basically they're making a comic industry from scratch. And I'm doing some work with them. So they're having their own convention in December, and the intention is for me to go back and appear there, and then hopefully before or after make my way out into the desert, and hopefully make my way back from.
Well, the getting back is the most important part.
Yeah, that's true. Ron, will you do me a favor? when you're out there, check the streets and see if the police are still driving Lamborghinis. That was the Lamborghini cop car was just so bizarre to me.
That's a real thing. I mean, that's in
I know.
Dubai. We saw some of that. So we were mostly in Abu Dhabi, but we did go to Dubai, which is like an hour away. It's
right.
And
As
you might
amazes me.
As you might expect, the road between the two cities is pretty flat and straight.
Yeah.
It's a miraculous place. And I'm really, really looking forward to going back because
that's great. I'm jealous.
I was very comfortable there. I was very content there. It did not, it's a foreign land, but it felt very, very welcoming and comforting. We had amazing hosts. It was one of my favorite trips, and I've had a lot of trips to really cool places. So to be towards the top of that list is pretty neat.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. Join comics, see the world.
Well, that's a real, as crazy as that sounds.
It is. No, it's true.
I've been to 6 continents. I don't think there's going to be an Antarctica Comic-Con at any point. But damn it, if there is, I'm going.
Right. Got it. Check mark.
I've been.
I'll be there too. I would love to go to Antarctica.
But I've been to Kenya and South Africa and New Zealand, India, Malta, Uruguay, like all of these, as well as Europe, and I just pinch myself and go, I'm in the middle of Kenya. I'm in East Africa.
Yeah.
Because I wrote comic books. Like this is
awesome.
This is the craziest thing going. But I am not looking that gift horse in the mouth whatsoever.
That's fantastic.
And that's beautiful. That's really one of the perks of the job that it doesn't get a lot of attention. That's great.
Well, you also have to be open to it. Like I know
that's true.
There are a fair number of American comic pros who do not want to get out that passport and go to a place where where there's not a McDonald's on the corner. And that's fine. That's their choice. But man, I will go anywhere because I just love seeing things and experiencing things that are wildly different than what we have here, but ultimately everybody's the same. I mean and I know that sounds like a hoary cliche, but you go to these places. You're in Kenya at a comic book convention, and a guy from Nairobi walks by wearing a Thanos t-shirt with an illustration by Jim Starlin on it.
Right.
Yeah.
Like that,
that's amazing.
That's a bucket of cold water that makes you sit up and take notice, and ultimately you find that we're all the same tribe.
Right.
Like the people who love comics and pop culture and video games and all that stuff, it doesn't matter what country you're in. We are all the same tribe. We all get it. We all talk shorthand.
It's a great donut shop. I'm telling you, it's a great donut shop. It's amazing.
Well,
Ron, I'm looking forward to seeing you in a couple of days.
Yeah.
As long as the airline cooperates, I'll be there.
Well, let's hope that's the case. It's hot down here. It's going to be hot.
Yeah, it's going to be hot there.
But it'll break just in time for you to see Springsteen.
My assumption is that it'll break and start raining just in time for me to be in like the fourth row of field seats for Springsteen.
Yeah, that's pretty much what's going to happen.
But look, that's the worst thing that happens to me. I go see Bruce Springsteen and get rained on.
Yeah,
I'm all right with that.
I will tell you, if you have time next week or next weekend, a couple of my stories with Springsteen. He's an amazing guy. Most down-to-earth guy I've ever met.
Probably the biggest influence on my writing, in addition to, Dickens and Stephen King and Jim Starlin and Alan Moore. But, as a storyteller, I don't think Springsteen takes a backseat to anybody.
I agree. I don't think people recognize that. I will tell you, and I know I'm in the minority here. I think Greetings from Asbury is one of the greatest albums. Is my favorite album.
Now, why do you think that puts you in the minority?
I just feel like people feel. I don't know. I don't think people have listened to it, and I think people will say, "Oh, it's his first thing," and he did so many more things that are so much more popular and known. But every song on Greetings from Asbury is a lyrical, explosion.
Yeah, I agree with you.
I absolutely love that album. I will listen to it constantly. I know every word of every song on that album.
Well, we've run past a little bit.
We've run past our time. Thank you so much, Ron, for doing this. We'll definitely do it again. I'm sure there'll be plenty more exciting things coming out. We can talk about them, and we'll see you in a couple of days. And we'll be having that panel on Friday, and probably a drink or two after. So.
I'll see you Friday, if not before.
Right.
Right. I really appreciate it. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you. Thank you for doing it.
I agree. Thanks, Ron. Bob, my friend.
Well, I'm trying to get him out. There we go. So I will see you in 2 days.
I'll see you in 2 days.
And everybody will be back here next week. We'll have stories to tell. We will have the wonderfully talented Alex Segura on next week. In this time, and thanks everybody for being here.
Thank you, folks, very much. If you're going to be in Baltimore, we'll see you in a couple of days. If not, we'll see you here next week.
This has been a production of the Pop Culture Squad Network. PopCultureSquad.com. How do you nerd?